What would you do to stop Kim Jong Un? And I mean tomorrow. Sheldon on WABC. Do you have a good idea? What would you do?
I would get the 30,000 or so American troops that sit between North and South Korea back into the United States to send the loudest message that could be possibly sent, that we are now clear to annihilate you without you having our men to immediately retaliate against no matter what we do.
Aha. Now, that's a very original thought, Sheldon. Now, I never thought of that, truthfully, until you just said it, which is that our American soldiers are actually hostages rather than preventative in terms of Kim Jong-un. He has them in his sights. So you're saying remove them.
Exactly. In 1955, it was very symbolic of American power. It's not anymore.
Well, there are a few men left who fought in Korea. I'm not one of them. It was a brutal fight. Brutal fight when our men faced the Chinese communist troops. Many of them had their guts blown out. So we don't need to be there, is what you're saying. Get them out of there. And once they're out of there, the hostages are gone.
Exactly. And that message will be heard around the world. We are ready to annihilate you if you insist.
Well, that's interesting because right now he knows that we can't really nuke him.
We can't do anything.
That's very interesting. So our own troops have become hostages of antiquated foreign policy.
Exactly.
Well, Sheldon, now what gave you this idea? Did you read it somewhere, or did you come up with it, or what?
I'm a dentist who was a history major in college, and I'm into this stuff. And
well, you sure are, Sheldon. I wish you were my dentist. We'd have good conversations in between the fillings.
Yes, we would, Doctor. Yes, we would.
No, Sheldon, it just shows you what I've said for years. The common man has an uncommon mind. It's the average guy out there who can still think. The schmucks in the media can't think. Your mind is sharper than everyone on CNN put together. So the country is cracked. It's divided. So I've asked you, the rational people, to listen to this program. Putting aside everything else, what would you do to stop Kim Jong-un? What would you do to stop those on terror watch lists in this country before they kill somebody? They're really somber questions. I realize they're not fun. There's no levity in them. It's like a piece of dry, unleavened bread, today's show. It's as though I'm wandering in the desert and I'm trying to talk to people who are parched in the sun. I don't have the answers. I had one caller in the last hour who I frankly, Sheldon, from WABC, a dentist, came up with the best idea yet, at least the starting point. I never heard this before. I never read it anywhere. He sounds like a better military analyst than any I've ever read. He said we should remove American troops from South Korea because they're part of an antiquated system, part of an antiquated foreign policy decision. They are, and he said they're symbolic anyway. What are they going to do there? They're there to what? Stop the North Korean troops from surging over the border? We're way past that. They can surge over the border with a nuclear weapon now instead of with troops. So we're not in 1951. Truman is long dead. And the men are basically hostages there. Our troops are hostages in South Korea. What are they going to do? Watch the nuke fly over their head? So if we get them out of there, Sheldon said, our men, then we're sending the strongest message possible both to China and to North Korea that we're ready to strike, and that's the end of it. Then maybe they'll cave in, and they'll stop this madman, and they'll remove him. Chinese can remove him tomorrow. Tomorrow. Gone. Gone. Fish food. Tomorrow he's fish food. This is no longer a South Park episode of Kim Jong-un. He's not a laughing matter. This guy's very seriously insane. What would you do? Steve on WABC, how would you deal with this problem?
I would hire the Israelis, and by
Steve, line 9, go ahead, please.
Yes, I would hire the Israelis, and by that I mean the Israeli Defense Force, and it's something we can use a surrogate just as easily as the Chinese can use North Korea, and Israel has long history in, number one, preemptive strikes to defend themselves, number two, For years, they have been battling the technology of the North Korean missiles that have been going to Iran and Syria and Hezbollah and so forth. Number three, they have experience in dealing with borderline fighting across their own border, which would be equivalent to South Korea against the North Korean border. And they are used to flying into dense barrages of artillery in their own defense. Furthermore, they would be completely unexpected in that environment. A preemptive.
Well, hold on. You're actually suggesting that the Israelis do the job, or advise us as to how to do the job?
Well, probably do the job. Maybe have their jets ferried over on American aircraft carriers that will be roaming the China waters anyway. But the point is, they have long experience, and they have one asset and benefit that we don't. Our nation is completely divided about this, but the Israelis have no qualms in defending themselves because they're basically brighter than we are nationally.
All right, so let's assume your idea is followed by our defense chiefs. How would it actually work? What could the Israelis do that our great military can't do? Let's be clear.
And they have long experience, as I said, in preemptive attacks. They got rid of the Iranian reactor underground. They
well, let's. So you were talking about the Stuxnet virus, aren't you?
Well, that ended. Yes, exactly right. But also,
all right, I recall that. But since the Stuxnet virus, which was allegedly produced by the Israeli geniuses and used to stop the centrifuges, occurred, we have had our ships stopped in the middle of the sea, and I would think it would be by China. You talk about cyber hacking. Would you agree with me that it was China that probably hacked our Navy ships and stopped them and let the freighters bang into them?
Systems on our Navy.
Yeah.
But my point is that the Israeli Defense Force has a long, successful history of preemptive strikes, and using conventional weapons. There'd be no question of using nuclear weapons. And it's in their own interest to do so on our behalf.
But Steve, I have heard that Kim Jong Un has hundreds of doubles that look like him around him at all times and in various parts of the nation. No one even knows where he is.
Yeah.
So how would you find him? How would you know if you're getting him or one of his doubles?
I'm not sure you could get him the actual titular figurehead, but you might get the many artillery pieces that you've talked about, and maybe some of the mobile transports that they're used to spotting in the desert, for example. This is a mountain environment, unfortunately. But the point is, the Israelis have a motivation here, too, which is that all the missiles that have been aimed at them in the Middle East by Iran and Syria come from North Korea. And if you cut off the head of that snake, it's in the Israeli interest in the future in the Middle East.
Well, I'm not so sure the Israelis are the vaunted military that you think they are. I think ours is better, frankly. We may have a divided leadership in this country as a result of the many, many years of pacifism and, frankly, treason that was operating in the military. But at the end of the day, I think our men are as good as any on the planet. I don't know why we would assume the Israelis are better.
Because they're a rapid deployment army and navy, but they would probably need a lift by our aircraft carriers. However, it's in their own interest to decapitate the arms that are coming from North Korea to the neighboring hostile countries around.
Why do you think it is that China continues to antagonize America? Do you agree with me that North Korea does nothing unless China tells them to do it, number one? And number two, second part of the question, do you see a correlation between when the missiles are shot and Trump's statements about the trade imbalance? Do you see a relationship between those two events?
Muslim holiday. You should not forget that Tuesday is Rosh Hashanah also. So they've done this just before Rosh Hashanah.
Wait, slow down. Wait a minute. These Islamic attacks in France and England that just occurred last night or this morning, whatever the time may be over there, were not anything to do with Rosh Hashanah. They were to do with the Muslim holiday I talked about.
Right, I agree on that, but it happens to be conveniently timed right before Rosh Hashanah.
Well, no, Rosh Hashanah is Wednesday night here in America, not last night.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's next week.
What does that have to do with the attacks that occurred last night?
It raises again the memory of fear in people. They want to have fear them.
Well, okay, I don't agree with you on that at all. But your main point is we should use Israeli allies.
Right, the surrogates for us, just as the Chinese and the Israelis are every bit as capable and more than the North Koreans.
Oh, okay, you're a very clear-thinking man. I don't agree with you 100% on the Israeli thing, but let me ask you to use your logical faculties with me.
Yep.
Trump does a preemptive strike directly or indirectly against North Korea. And they do or they do not kill Kim directly, but they stop him, and they kill an awful lot of North Koreans in doing so because they're collateral damage, unfortunately.
Yes.
As were the Berliners who were killed in the final days of the assault on Berlin. Mm-hmm. Not every German was a Nazi. Not every German was a bad person. Mm-hmm. So what would happen the next day with Wolf Blitzer, Jake Tapper, and the others who hate this country?
Well, frankly, I don't care what they think, but the analogy, you brought the German analogy, World War II. I keep thinking that Obama was sort of our Neville Chamberlain, and I'm hoping that Trump will step up and be our Winston Churchill.
So don't we all. But even Winston Churchill was called a fascist by his own government when he was trying to rearm Britain in the 1930s. The very same voices we hear in America against Trump were calling Churchill a fascist because he wanted to build a military. He saw what was coming. He saw the winds of war. He felt them.
I keep thinking we better act in that way, to follow the analogy, before the current-day V-2 rockets start flying over west coast of the United States rather than London, as they did by analogy back then.
You know, it's interesting you bring up the V-2 rockets, the V-1 and the V-2s. The V-2 rockets the Nazis developed were so far ahead of their time. The first jet plane, so many weapons were so far ahead of their time by the Nazi engineers. It's amazing that they lost the war. And it's interesting to me that our entire rocket program was developed in America with German engineers. You know that, taken here from Germany. Namely Werner von Braun.
Yeah, we couldn't wait to get Werner von Braun after World War II to have him head up our United States rocket effort.
But people forget that the Russians also took some German engineers over to Russia.
They're not. We took ours.
Yeah, but at the same time, they took their share of German engineers and scientists over to Russia to develop their rocket program, which is also very intriguing. But was it not for Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who stole our atomic secrets and gave them to Russia, Russia would not have developed their nuclear weapons at the time that they did. You know that, and I know that.
That's correct. That's absolutely accurate, and that's what's left us in the thermonuclear race. And now,
correct. Now, let me go into Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They exist today. There are many Julius and Ethel Rosenbergs in America today. They side with the enemy. They spy for the enemy. They undermine America. They are no different than Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They're working for the enemies of our very survival. And some of them have very, very big names and very big positions. Indeed. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with me that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are alive today?
Their equivalents certainly are. And I think that, fortunately, the average Israeli citizen seems to have better sense than we do here. And perhaps they could act in the true role of what we want an ally to be, which many of our erstwhile claims on allies have proven false. Maybe the Israelis could do such a preemptive job in our name, and thereby the United States avoids the agony that's going on in our schizophrenic mind, our national schizophrenia.
Well, I would ask you a question, but I'll never get the answer. But I sense that you're more deeply involved in this subject than may appear on first listening.
Let me duck that question.
I thank you for calling, and shalom.
You too.